I'm very thankful to be in this space with you all on our third Sunday of sharing. Pastors Isabel Call and I have been inspired by the poem Mending Wall by Robert Frost, with its famous line of "Good fences make good neighbors." Our neighboring congregations have obvious edges that adjoin in our passion for social justice, and perhaps other edges as well. These edges, like fences, boundaries, walls, benefit from a seasonal inspection and shared maintenance, like the poet and his neighbor. I've asked myself, are the walls that usually differentiate our spaces good walls? And what makes a wall good? I chose the story of the woman at the well out of the Bible today because Jesus's radical, boundary-challenging nature is front and center. I also approach it with caution, as this chapter and the previous one in John's Gospel hold notorious clobber verses that have been wielded as weapons. And some of the worst versions of sharing good news that Christians have done. So I find this line of Frost's poem helpful here. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Before I rolled away a few stones here and there to give you a closer glimpse of how I see this conversation at the well, I want to assure you my intent is not to wall anyone out or in. Instead, I want to be curious with you about how Jesus and the woman managed to navigate a potentially offensive encounter and come away ready to share more. I am thankful to count many familiar, friendly faces in this crowd. So it's exaggerating to compare our congregations to the neighboring enemy groups of Jews and Samaritans. Hyperbole is a common literary device in the Bible that works to draw attention and make a point. So I'll lean on that for this analogy. We're meeting in a public space, a well of sorts, that belongs to some of us. We meet knowing that we have different approaches to spirituality, and that can bring out confusion, angst, and curiosity. Similar to this meeting between the woman and Jesus. They weren't supposed to be in the same place, or talk, or touch the same container. It was against the rules. And by talking and listening, they discovered a way that their aims overlapped, a place in the wall where a door could be added. The radical hospitality they exchanged changed the boundary. Jesus asked the woman to meet his need of physical thirst. He requested what he needed most to stay alive. He was being vulnerable. It takes vulnerability to ask for help. The woman pointed out the wall that would be transgressed if she did share water. Remember our history of harm, putting up walls and tearing down walls? Who do you think you are? Jesus doesn't respond with, "I'm famous. You should know me and do as I say." It's more like, if you could see past these cultural boundaries, we could have a different conversation. We could talk about what gives us life in a spiritual sense. What bubbles up inside you when you're drinking from the depths of life? What motivates you to keep on when you're tired? When you've been working for good change, when you've been making good trouble, when you're exhausted in the work for peace and justice. I propose that we can ask each other for help, perhaps more so now that we have spent 3 Sunday mornings together. The woman also practices vulnerability when she says, yes, I want this kind of water. I wonder if voicing her willingness to let her guard down a little was the key to this conversation taking an immediate deep dive. And it moves into the awkward topic of the woman's marital status. I've heard this story read in many different tones, sometimes accusatory and shame-filled. When I read it, I hear it like Sue read it, with Jesus being playfully curious and the woman being confident. Much has been preached about why she is going to the well at noon. Most women would go in the cool of the day when the other women were going there. There's nothing explicit here about a moral stigma. Maybe she was divorced, maybe widowed. Jesus doesn't dwell on this. It's simply named. What's most remarkable is that it doesn't make the wall between them higher. Hearing him talk about her life piqued her interest to go deeper into spiritual matters. During their shared history recorded in the Hebrew Bible, there were two contesting theologies and related policies about the other. One was self-protective against outsiders. The other was more inclusive of outsiders. We find multiple examples of these in the Hebrew scriptures. Some of the leaders would have proposed building a 30-foot high wall between their land and other nations. Sound familiar? US-Mexico, Israel-Palestine, East and West Germany. One Hebrew poet said, "There is nothing new under the sun." Jesus' ancestors were of a mind for inclusion. Last month, we listened to the story of Rahab together. She is in Jesus' family tree. Another ancestress of his was Ruth, from another enemy nation. And here is one of the most endearing immigration stories to me. The characters in her story creatively follow the existing rules to solve problems. Some of the long-standing rules were already in place to care for the poor, the hungry, the foreigners. Other rules needed to be loopholed so that an immigrant widow could be cared for and welcomed fully into community. So Rahab and Ruth were some of Jesus's really great grandmothers. He inherited the way of being in the world that welcomes the marginalized and alienated. He intentionally challenged the leaders who kept stacking the religious wall of separation higher and higher. And this woman at the well was ready to reciprocate Jesus's welcome, to accept the olive branch of his words. She could have, should have ignored him, walked away. The conversation between Jesus and this woman is longer than any other recorded in the Gospels, because she continues it by asking the most sensitive question she knew: what place do you think is the right place to worship? She didn't hesitate to pull out that ancient argument that had divided their peoples: Jerusalem or Mount Gerizim? I love how often Jesus answers an either-or question with neither. It's all about spirit and truth. In the previous chapter of John, a religious leader, Nicodemus, the Pharisee, has a somewhat similarly confusing conversation with Jesus. He doesn't seem to grasp the spirit and truth answer. The woman does. Or at least she wants to invite her neighbors to ponder it with her. So what she does next is hurry back to her city and tell her neighbors what just happened. With a gentle, "Come and see," she persuades them to come to the well. This might be someone we've been looking for that will set things right. And many of those neighbors came to that conclusion. Jesus' ministry shattered boundaries of religion and politics, gender codes, and marital practices. Going into Samaria was culturally subversive. Inviting the woman to carry living water to her neighbors was also culturally subversive. Religious leaders were male. This story flows from exposing boundaries onward to shattering and transcending them, healing the rivalry of alienated peoples. What Jesus did motivates me here today and to invite us to consider the wall that is the boundary between us and to walk it together, to graffiti it with ideas of passageways, to celebrate our own boundary day. What the woman did inspires me as a woman and a spiritual leader. She shows up in a long line of women, unnamed and named, who have carried water, both physical and spiritual, to others. This woman did so beyond the walls. We live in a world that wants to divide us up. Jesus had a straightforward conversation with someone he wasn't supposed to talk to, and she carried it forward. I want to do that. It's not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. We are gathered at a sort of well today, bringing the simple clay jars that we are to get filled. We're having a non-kosher encounter that can feel confusing. It also gives us an opportunity to wrestle with how I worship God wherever I go, anywhere, with anyone. I can be secure in my practice and hold space for you to be secure in yours. Could it be that the rules that have kept us from talking about faith are as easily revised as they were for Jesus and the woman? Can we discern together that avoiding being in the same space or sharing the same containers is in violation of some new kind of margin act from the Boundary Standards Authority that encourages ongoing active neighboring between churches, that incentivizes drinking from each other's wells? Worship in spirit and truth renders rivalry and enmity out of order. My definition for a good wall? A wall is a good wall if you can be in relationship with whomever or whatever is on the other side. Collaborate on wall maintenance and discern together when it's time for a door. A wall is good when it's useful to people on both sides, or for keeping cows in and out. Maybe that's a little bit like keeping the traditions in without imposing them on others. Recognizing where the wall is, meeting there, speaking over it and about it, questioning the wall, proposing doors and windows in it. This is what makes good neighbors, especially as faith communities that share edges. So we have good walls between us. I see them as adequate in height. We can see over them and past them to one another. We can all take a look at how each other's walls are built, from variations in Sunday morning practices to how we make decisions. I'm better at seeing where the Mennonite side of the wall needs mending when I walk it with you. I can see where fear has eroded away our identity of being welcoming. I can also begin to guess where a passageway could be useful, uniting our energy for creation care, peace, social justice. Like the characters in Thomas Olaf's vision, we can adopt this boundary between UUs, UCCs, and Mennonites. We can take down the barbed wire and roll away the stones. We can be the citizens invited to graffiti the wall in question with comments and proposals for new openings. So now I invite you to embody that metaphor. Let's do some graffiti of our own. Those of you here present in this room have sticky notes on which you can jot down your ideas. Those of you in Zoom are welcome to consider your ideas and then throw them into the chat box as we are being sent. I invite you to reflect on these prompts and use sticky notes or chat. Eventually, you can wait on the chat. Just consider those and then throw them all out at the end. What help does your church need that the other churches might be able to offer? Advice on improving technology for us. Could you suggest a door or window in programming through which our churches could collaborate? What specific good trouble could we get into together? What questions linger for you about the ways the other two groups are doing or being church? And then for each of the other groups, I hope you'll write something that says, I like how you. Please take this time to do some reflection.